2 rifles, 1 double-barrel shotgun, 2 repeating rifles, 1 ship's log, 2 harpoons, 2 axes, 1 saw, 2 compasses, 1 first-quality Malitza, 12 second-quality Malitzas, 1 sleeping bag, 14 pairs of skis, and 1 small pair of binoculars. These are the items Lieutenant Brusilov asked me to return to him at a later date. It was as if he thought there would be horses and carriages at the gangway waiting to take us to the nearest railway station. I apologise. I should start at the beginning. Lieutenant Brusilov, as you may know, is a moderately experienced navigator, uninterested in exploration of the Arctic for its own sake. However, 2 years ago he decided to set sail to try and find new hunting grounds for walrus, seal, polar bear and whale. As he was recruiting for his ship, the St. Anna, his second-in-command, who was bringing with him much-needed funds, a doctor with a library of Arctic books, failed to reach the port of Alexandrovsk. This was a great irritation to Brusilov, who had to pay ridiculously high tax for bringing a ship purchased in another country into harbour. He recruited 23 of us in all. The final 5 I'll take Maximov, Bayash, Bukovsky and that man. That man there. The one the size of a bear. Lunayev. And you. Yes, you're the one with the moustache similar to mine. Alexander Conrad. Good, you'll do. Only 3 were genuine sailors. The rest were opportunists, hoping to make a ruble or 2 in the fur trade. That evening, as Brusilov knocked back his vodka, he accepted a friend's offer of help. Miss Yamina Zhdanko has agreed to join us. I have assured her that the first leg of the trip shall last 3 weeks at the most. She has some nurse's training, so she might prove useful. And so, we set sail, later than we had hoped, from the port of Alexandrovsk on August the 28th, 1912. We hoped to emerge 7,000 miles away at Vladivostok. Miss Zhdanko enjoyed the first leg of the trip so much, she decided to stay aboard for the rest of the journey. She informed us of her decision as she was serving supper. The men cheered, which made her cheeks go bright red. And this made the men cheer even more. But Brusilov had underestimated the Kara Sea, and by October the 15th, 1912, the St. Anna was trapped in the ice. We survived the first winter well. After all, we had enough provisions aboard to feed 30 men for over 18 months. But the summer came and went without any prospect of a thaw, and the second winter was brutal. January the 9th, 1914. There is mutiny in the air, and so I, Valerian Ivanovich Albanov, have decided to leave the St. Anna, walk 200 miles across a frozen sea with the hope of being saved. My aim was to reach Cape Flora, some 235 miles away, and then find Camp Jackson, where there might be huts, winter provisions. This notion led to over half the crew wanting to join me. We had to build 7 sledges and kayaks altogether. Brusilov had not had the foresight to bring such equipment with us. We had to prepare our clothing. We had to sew and repair our boots. We had to gather supplies. The work was extraordinarily difficult. We even had to make many of our own tools. Many pieces of wood were ripped from the ship and sawed for each kayak. The pieces were joined together with rivets, which we made from copper scrap, and then lashed together with strong twine, before the entire skeleton was covered with canvas from spare sails. As we worked, Conrad would come up to me saying, "We must go, navigator, we must. We cannot go on doing the same thing." In March, there was an opening in the ice, which allowed us to subject our small kayaks to sea trials. We even gave them names, such as Fulmar, Gull, Auk, Teal, and Snow Bunting. They performed better than our clumsy tools and materials allowed us to hope. Brusilov smiled. "Tremendous effort, Albanov. Of course, my sense of responsibility remains intact." "Yes, sir. Why is that?" "You are all choosing to leave voluntarily." To escape his mockery, I climbed the crow's nest and looked out across the horizon in the vain hope of spying some distant landmass. It was exhilarating being up there. The slightest breeze, exquisite crystals of hoarfrost. From time to time, powdery garlands of snow would loose themselves from the rigging and tumble like white petals onto the dormant ship below, motionless in her icy prison. April the 10th, 1914, the day of our departure. There was a great meal and hot soup served by Miss Danko. As we drank our soup, which Conrad deemed to be tasty, navigator, you wouldn't find better in Moscow, Baev came up to me and asked, "Might I be permitted to mark the occasion, sir?" He played our favourite tune. I collected letters. There were many from Miss Danko. Her red cheeks long since covered by layers and layers of grey soot. Her brave young eyes, a sea of held back tears. I opened my mouth to try and find the right words, but they froze in my throat. Instead, I held her frozen gaze and made a silent promise to myself. She pressed into my hands a map that she had drawn. It was taken from Nansen's map of these waters, taken from farthest north, a book of his that we had studied together many times. Nansen himself ascribed no particular accuracy to this map, but Miss Danko said it was at least a little encouraging to see the outlines of land here and there. We made a strange-looking group out on the ice. High boots made of sealskin with sailcloth uppers, caps and earmuffs. Brusilov himself wished us a safe and speedy onward journey. We were all suddenly uncharacteristically quiet. Everyone seemed to be waiting for a signal to leave. And so they all did the same. And the men shouted, "Hurrah! Hurrah! Hurrah!" And with runners creaking and pitching, like boats plying the ocean swells, our sledges made their way laboriously southwards over the ice. The journey was quite straightforward at first, but soon we were in a raging snowstorm. We pitched the tent as quickly as possible. We'd covered barely 3 miles. The storm grew in strength and we slid into our militsi. The temperature read -9 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, to conserve body heat, my companions preferred to sleep in pairs. The disadvantage of this was that one would invariably disturb the sleep of the other. The 2 worst culprits were the best of friends, Conrad and Szpakowski. "All right, Conrad, shift your friggin' legs, will you?" "You'll shift yours." "Move, you stinking ass, now!" For that reason, I preferred to sleep alone. I have always slept alone. Over the course of 4 days, the storm drove us 22 miles northwards. This meant that we were actually 19 miles farther from our destination than when we first started. I decided to sacrifice 2 of the sledges and kayaks. But the thought that summer was on its way restored my courage and convinced me to carry on. Now, as a rule, we would set out at around 9 o'clock each morning with 2 or 3 of the sledges, which we pulled for a couple of hours and then went back for the remainder. The sledges were always placed in a circle around the tent, together with the kayaks, which we attached with guy ropes. On the 11th day, the 3 of the men came and asked permission to return to the ship. Of course, I could not refuse their request. But if they were going to get so quickly disheartened, they're of no use to me! Lunayev watched them pack.
Cowards! That's what you are! Cowards!
Within the hour they had left on skis, their rucksacks filled with biscuits and ammunition. Goodbyes were short. Now 10 men accompanied me. Maximov, Regalts, our elected cook, Bayev, Ahiriev, Nielsen, a young boy who could hardly speak any Russian, Gubanov, Shmirenikov, Lunayev, Szpakowski, and sailor Alexander Conrad. By now the men were not only permanently hungry, but suffering varying degrees of snow blindness. One morning, the sun was a ball of flames. I could see a port, aromas of tropical fruit, oranges, apricots, raisins and cloves. I could see, smell and taste the world I wanted to be in. And for a moment I didn't know where I was. And then I tripped over my ski pole. As the men helped me up from my fall, I told them of my vision. Conrad listened with great interest.
Perhaps this is a good omen, navigator.
But Shpakovsky, who was not one to romanticize, looked at me and the surrounding miles of ice. A good omen?
Bollocks!
However, this did perhaps bring us some good fortune, for there were many seals. We discovered that if one whistles to them, Nielsen was very good at this, the seals will approach, evidently intrigued. In this fashion, we were able to kill 4 or 5 of them immediately. To our great delight, this lucky catch greatly enhanced our dwindling supplies of flesh and blubber. Seal brains, fried in seal oil. Very good. My companions overindulged on seal blubber. Cut into pieces, fried, served on a ship's biscuit makes a tasty treat. Conrad was deliriously happy.
Heaven itself, navigator.
After a while I had to tell him, stop eating the biscuits!
I would not advise any sailor to embark on a journey like this.
The month of May arrived, and Bayev asked if we might head
in a more westerly direction, sir.
because according to his scouting trips there were long, uninterrupted stretches of smooth ice to be found.
It's as flat as a skating rink.
We headed west for an entire day, but the promised stretches of smooth ice did not appear.
It is there, sir. I've seen it with my own eyes. Please, sir, grant me permission to explore terrain to the west.
Permission granted, Bayev. The rest of us headed south-southeast and quickly found a more predictable route and returned to the tent within 3 hours. Bayev was not there. We waited. We searched for 3 days! We had to assume that they had fallen through a fissure in the ice. We forced ourselves to focus on moving forward. We had to keep moving. I paddled on ahead with the sailor, Nielsen, who insisted on whistling the entire journey. I can only assume that he was trying to lift our spirits. When I reached the edge of open water, I climbed up onto a high block of ice and looked out across the horizon, searching for our other boats. I could only see 2 of them. 2 hours went by, and still the others hadn't arrived. Finally, the other kayaks approached us. It would appear that alone in his kayak, our cook, Regalt, could not resist the temptation of climbing alone up onto an iceberg. Did the men learn nothing? When he was ready to return to his kayak, the edge of the boat slipped away from beneath him and he took an involuntary plunge in the freezing water. Soaked to the skin, he was in great danger of freezing to death. We pitched the tent as quickly as possible and built up a bonfire. This unplanned halt was a great irritation to me, but Shpakovsky was furious. "If you try that again, I'll kick your friggin' ass from here to Vladivostok!" Lenaev, who used to be a great beast of a man, was now so weak from helping Regald he could hardly stand. He crumpled like an old bear onto the ice.
This is harder than I thought.
I decided to sacrifice another sledge and kayak. For 10 men, 4 sledges and 4 kayaks would have to suffice, come what may. While we were stranded, I managed to calculate that we had 23 sacks of biscuits left. Now this would be enough to last us for 1 month. But if we managed to kill a few more seals, then I could reduce our daily ration. However, I had to endure listening to constant conversations from the men about the tastiest of foods.
Roast meat, navigator. How I do love a good mouthful of roast meat. And fried potatoes.
And friggin' mountains of Peritsky. Oh, and marinated herring. Maximov! Nobody likes marinated herring. Oh, I do. Lenaev started to cough. He was spitting blood. I examined his gums and noted they bore the characteristic symptoms of scurvy. In an effort to save money, Brusilov hadn't bothered to pack enough fruit. Lenaev's recovery would now depend on his physical strength and his will to live. Over the following days, we managed to avoid the dangerous waters, and the terrain around us changed. All around us were sheets of bluish ice. Some of it was mixed with sand and clay. Clay! This lifted our spirits, and we pushed forwards. Some mornings it was so foggy, which makes one's eyes so terribly painful. Mine hurt so much I could only look at my diary through a fog of tears rolling down my cheeks. Only in complete darkness did the pain go, and I was able to imagine myself in a kinder place, with more educated people. Miss Zhdanko, of whom I had grown fond, had quickly tired of Brusilov's bragging. She and I discovered that we shared a passion for reading. As the doctor, with his Arctic library, failed to reach the port of Alexandrovsk, Brusilov sent for some of his own books, and to my horror, and then to my delight, they were all works of fiction. Miss Zhdanko and I would spend hours reading to one another, her crystal blue eyes peeping over the top of her book. Of course, as the ship's supplies dwindled, the books were used to keep the fires burning. Brusilov, he's a fool, a negligent fool. However, we did have a real Whitsuntide treat. As the men in the last kayak caught us up, they approached us shouting, "Guess what? Shut up, Lenaev. Let me tell the navigator." "Ha ha! We've only gone and shot a friggin' polar bear." "Shpakovsky! Polar bear?" We hadn't eaten polar bear since last September. 3 kayaks were made ready to go back and retrieve this precious bounty, whose hide and fat would help to keep us warm. "Oh, let me at it!"
I'm having it.
"Art, cut it properly. Cut it according to the rules of the meat cutter's art." But sir, pelt first. Be careful! Don't lose a drop of its fat."
What about the skin, navigator?
Burn it. Well, that's got to be worth 200 rubles.
Do you want to carry it?
I'm not frigging carrying it.
Then do as the navigator says. Conrad!
Dear Conrad. The blood was collected in containers, and that evening we had a choice of boiled or roasted bear meat. The liver was eaten raw, with salt. The men were transformed. A boisterous humour replaced their disheartened lassitude. Hope and courage blossomed before my eyes. But I should say that men very quickly took back their praise of the bear's liver, and Shpakovsky suffered terribly. "Oh, God! Oh, my stomach's gone through my friggin' arse!" He was desperate to rest, but we had to keep moving. Over the following days, the ice floes grew smaller and smaller, forcing us to use our kayaks for most of the time. Sometimes these floes were only 200 yards apart. Miss Stanko's copy of Nansen's map showed 2 peaks of over 1,200 feet on the island. Now, we should have been able to see those long ago. So now the job of looking to the horizon for signs of land became so important. That night in the tent, I promised 25 rubles to the first man that sights land. But the men, they just looked at me and smiled, and then went back to their meal. Noting my annoyance, the men cajoled me into playing a game of who could offer the best proof that life is worth living. Life is worth living because
Borscht on a Sunday afternoon with mother's fried mushrooms picked from an autumn forest. Navigator.
Life is worth living because, oh, the touch of a woman. Hey, Miss Danko's ankles, eh? That's enough, Shpakovsky. Lenaev.
Vodka. And the little boy's smile. What about you, navigator? Go on, sir.
Life is worth living because of books. I will share with you now a concern that I had kept from my companions. We were drifting south, but this rapid southward drift was carrying us so quickly I feared we might miss land altogether and end up in the Barents Sea. So I decided to press forwards on foot and sacrificed another sledge and kayak. For 10 men, 3 sledges and 3 kayaks would have to suffice. We tied up our remaining 12 sacks of biscuits, our warm clothing, and most valuable of all, our guns and ammunition. Gulls and auks
started to fill the sky. Make such a racket, like evil spirits flitting all around us, revelling in our unfortunate circumstance. They laugh and shriek at us like hysterical women. Pale, silver strip, sinuous contours, gradients of colour. The left edge seeming to grow slowly paler, whilst the right stood out more distinctly. 5 times in the night I returned to look at this strange discovery. So far nobody else had seen this wonderful sight. I had to restrain myself from running back into the tent and shouting, "Wake up! Come and see that our prayers have been answered!" Then I also thought, if you want to see this miracle, you will have to open your eyes. The morning was beautiful. My hypothetical piece of land stood out even more clearly. I tried to work out how far away we were. My eyes were not used to judging such distances. I thought perhaps 50, 60 nautical miles to the highest peak. So perhaps 20, 35 nautical miles to the nearest shore. The only certainty was that we were closer to being rescued than we had been for the last 2 years. I ran to tell the men, who ate quickly and packed our belongings with great speed. By 9 o'clock we had covered between 2 or 3 miles and made a decision not to pitch the tent until we had reached land. That evening, in the tent, we sat with mixed feelings, because not only had we failed to reach land, we were now further from it than we had been that morning. The ice floes, they were in perpetual motion. "7 days have passed. The ice floe we are on is surrounded by brash ice. There is no way out. Our only hope is that the wind will push us towards the land. Famished, we have decided to stop." As we were unpacking, I noticed there was half a sack of biscuits missing. This unfortunate discovery forced me to call my companions together. "If this happens again, I will hold you all responsible and reduce your rations. If I catch the thief red-handed, I swear, I will shoot him on the spot." I looked each man in the eyes. Their ravaged faces, thin film of skin draped over nothing but bone. We had not washed for 2 months. Our underclothes, unspeakable rags swarming with lice. I was convinced that if we put our clothes on the ground, they would crawl away by themselves. Each night in the tent, we would indulge in our nightly hunt for game. Oi, Conrad, keep friggin' still, will you? There's one crawling up your neck. This
communal activity united us in a remarkable fashion. All squabbles usually ceased during these hours. But the answer to my earlier outburst came the following day, when two men came and asked permission to go out scouting. I said yes and gave them their usual ration of biscuits. The next morning I learned that they had not yet returned. By noon they were still missing. Increasingly worried, I resolved to go out and search for them when Nielsen came running up behind me. They take everything. They'd taken a pair of best boots, Maximus warmest clothing, a 20-pound sack of biscuits, our shotgun with 200 cartridges. I ran to my kayak. The thieves had been there too. What else? 12 boxes of matches, a pair of binoculars, the soldered tin can containing our correspondence. Our documents, all gone. Oh, I'll kill them bastards! The men wanted to set out in hot pursuit and mete out sweet justice, but I quickly calculated the thieves already had a great head start on us. A chase would be risky. We would now have to resign ourselves to this painful turn of events. We now had to sacrifice the heavy tent, as well as another sledge and kayak. We set out with heavy hearts. We covered barely 2 miles when both sledges broke. We repaired one quickly, but the other was more seriously damaged. The rest of us waited whilst 2 men went back to our old camp to retrieve our jettisoned sledge. As we were waiting, we made a tent using the sails from our kayaks by placing our ski poles in the ground and then draping them with the sailcloth. We explored our surroundings and quickly found some tracks left by the thieves, but they soon disappeared. Through the eyeglass of my sextant, I could make out the vague, distant shapes of the 2 individuals. If we caught them then, their trial would be brief. Catching my mood, the sea began to heave and the ice started to move and break. The ice floe we were on was now only 24 feet in diameter. Within a matter of seconds, our situation changed dramatically. Grab onto anything you can! The gale was driving us northeast. We were sucked out into open water. Waves smashed down onto our disintegrating ice floe. Our kayaks, the uncontrollable logs, the cape disappeared from view. The gale abated at 11 o'clock in the evening, and the tide washed the ice towards the land once more. That was a critical evening. Though at the time we could not perceive the miracle that had been visited upon us. We dragged ourselves from the ice and staggered onto the island. We pulled ourselves up over rocks and peered through a hole in the glacier.
Well, I'll be damned.
Eiders, gulls, kittiwakes, auks. And there's a pond. And another, and another. And pebbles. Pebbles, millions of them.
Oh, and moss. Oh, and flowers. Tiny yellow flowers.
It was the strangest sensation. After 2 years on the heaving ice pack in storms and in cold, we were finally on land. Lunayev caught sight of 3 eiders on the wing. Maximov tried to shoot at them with our only remaining handgun, but missed, leaving nothing but a hole in the air. But his shot created a strange echo. Was that not someone calling? And we could see the figure of a man running towards us as fast as he could, waving his cap in the air. It was one of the thieves. He wept, wailed, and begged our forgiveness. I had made my oath. He was truly pitiful. Conrad lowered his head. Thank you, navigator. We demanded to be led to their hideout. This was nothing but a simple ditch, and they'd been living like animals. The second thief looked ill. He had suffered much. Sorry. There was no danger of starving here. There was an abundance of driftwood, and soon a cheerful fire was blazing. The thieves cooked us an omelette and showed us that no harm had come to the items they had stolen from us. June the 27th, 1914. I instructed the men to hunt for eggs. Conrad and Shpakovsky very generously volunteered. Near to the sea, they made a remarkable discovery. They found a beer bottle with patented screw tops. Suspecting this might be some sort of hiding place, they carefully removed the stones from around the bottle and discovered this. Inside there was still in excellent condition. This flag was buried. Forgive me, my English. Buried during the Jackson-Harmsworth Polar Expedition, Cape Mary, Harmsworth, August the 7th, 1897. Cape Harmsworth. We had reached the southwestern tip of Alexandra Land. All we had to do now was reach the south coast, continue our journey across land, and we would reach Camp Jackson. We were finally on a well-known, previously travelled route. We reached the south coast within 2 hours. Over the following days, we split into 2 groups. Myself, Conrad, Lunayev, Shpakovsky, and Nielsen were in kayaks. The rest were on skis. We agreed to meet at Cape Neal. We arrived in the kayaks on July the 1st at 10 in the evening and found ourselves in a sheltered bay. Cape Neal is a moss-covered promontory that slopes gently towards the sea. The group on skis had yet to arrive. We made camp and tried to sleep, but my mind would not rest. The missing men, they weren't experienced.
They were feckless, reckless bounty hunters. In moments of fitful sleep in my mind's eye, I dreamt of Miss Danko's eyelashes slowly batting like birds' wings. While we were waiting for the skiers to catch up with us, the men wanted to move the kayaks to a more sheltered place. We tried, but Nielsen was almost swept out to sea. Shpakowski rushed to his rescue in another kayak. Nielsen was so sick and lethargic, he seemed to surrender to the waves without fighting back. He seemed almost indifferent to our efforts to rescue him.
July the 4th. I am convinced that we are very close to Camp Jackson. I wonder what will remain there.
It had been 17 years since anyone had lived there. I hoped and prayed for new clothes. We resolved, weather permitting, to set out for Bell Island the following day. I could delay no longer out of consideration for Nielsen, who could hardly stand. And Shpakowski's condition was scarcely more encouraging. "I'll just sit." Come the morning, Nielsen could barely move. Conrad managed to shoot a seal. That meat would taste delicious. The pup was butchered where it lay, and the ice turned red at once. We cooked the meat as quickly as we could and tried to give a cupful of bouillon to Nielsen. His eyes were vacant. He kept trying to... We wrapped his body in a blanket, took it by sledge as far as the next terrace. We buried him in a grave made of stones. We, the survivors, took leave of the grave. We could not afford to succumb to our emotions and regarded the next candidate with some suspicion, mentally assessing whether Shpakowski would make it to the next stop. Conrad was furious with him. "Now, you lame duck, what are you doing just sitting around? Hey, go on, get up, move, move!" Shpakowski obeyed, ran to get some wood. "Don't you dare stumble! Don't you dare!" We all set off for Cape Flora that morning. I was in the first kayak with Conrad, whilst Lenaev went with Shpakowski in the second, together with equipment which had previously been in mine, such as books, diary notes, cartridges. What started as an easy crossing soon became a battle against the elements. We were caught in a tidal current that started to drag us at alarming speed out towards the open sea. We were soon separated from Lenaev and Shpakowski. "Conrad! Alvanov! Help us!" Our kayaks were tossed like children's toys. It soon became clear that we would lose this battle against the sea. Conrad and I managed to get to an iceberg and hoisted ourselves onto it. We searched for the other kayak. We could not see it.
We huddled together in a hollow, Conrad's legs up against my back inside my fur, mine inside his. Suddenly, a dreadful cracking sound. We were plunged into the water. Our double Melitza filled quickly and started to drag us down to the bottom. I will not die like this. I will not. For who will know how he died? My very last ounce of strength rebelled against such an unsung disappearance, and in that moment my feet met Conrad's, and we pushed each other out of our deadly shroud. Once we were free, we found ourselves on the lower ledge of the iceberg, water up to our chest, while all around us floated boots, gloves.
What do we do now, navigator?
Swim! Swim for the kayak! We quickly tossed on board the boat our few remaining objects, and then scrambled on board and rowed in a desperate bid to get warm again. Bell Island was the nearest. We quickly built up a bonfire using the remains of our sledge, our medical kit, in short, anything that would burn. We ran about madly waiting for the flames to catch, and as soon as they did, we hung our fur hides over them to dry. During the night, tremors racked my body. Conrad refused to lie down so that he would not succumb to the cold. The following morning brought better weather, but neither of us could stop shivering. Conrad's toes were frozen. They seemed ready to snap off. But we refused to give in to despair. The gull, carrying Lunayev and Shpakovsky, had disappeared from view, but we still nurtured a faint hope. As well as parts of my diary, some documents. They were carrying our only rifle and all of its ammunition. All we had was a shotgun, 40 shells. We knew that wouldn't last long. Eventually we reached a good landing place and made for the shore. Nansen himself could not have been more moved than we were that day. After such a terrible journey that had lasted 3 months, we had reached our goal. And we stood on Cape Flora.
Navigator Albanov.
Alexander Conrad. Heather grew on every terrace. Cape Flora certainly lived up to her name. And then there was a pole, and another, and another. And as we rounded the corner, we could see the cabin with a chimney. The doorway was covered with snow and ice. We quickly pushed this aside with our hands. Inside we found crates. Our knives quickly got the better of the metal. Inside we discovered rabbit meat, pork, and Maximov's much-loved marinated herring. We also made a precious discovery. We found a box containing lead cartridges and 12-gauge shotgun shells. They were a perfect match for our gun. Conrad was more interested in what he had discovered. Ship's biscuits, We ate our fill and I stuffed his pockets with more. Over on one of the bunks we found a medicine chest filled with first aid supplies. We were very pleased to discover this because inside we also found peppermint drops. Oh, they'll go very nicely with our tea. Outside we discovered another smaller hut with a horseshoe on the doorframe. Oh, we could live here, Navigator. Inside there was a table with a wide bunk and a cast iron stove, together with some kindling. Soon the room was warm enough for us to dry our clothes. My mind would not rest. It kept returning to the memory of our lost companions. And during this time I became very low, even delirious. I was convinced there was 3 of us on the island. I would run up to Conrad and ask after the well-being of our 3rd companion. During these attacks he would take me gently by the arm and lead me out into the fresh air.
It's just the 2 of us, Navigator. Just you and me.
This news would come as a great shock to me and send me into a deep fit of melancholy. I would sit for hours at the open doorway of the cabin, looking out across the land, ridiculously searching, hoping that she... In the darkness of the night, I repeated our story over and over again. And I will go on repeating it, so I will not forget a second. Until I can share my story with the one who matters most. July the 20th, 1914, about 6 in the evening. I left Conrad working in the larger cabin and went for a walk by the sea. The weather was warm. There was a fine sea mist. Another hallucination. Two masts. Another hallucination. Rising. Main mast. Another hallucination. A mizzen. A smokestack. Vapour. Conrad! Alexander Conrad! A ship is coming! Soon a hull emerged from the mist. I could make out it was the St. Fokker! At first, Alexander thought that I was still delirious, but then he too could see her. She was, by now, almost stationary, searching for a way through the ice. We ran to get our best clothing, make ourselves decent for our first meeting with polite company. We ran out to the shore and paddled through the thick fog. Soon we heard voices. You caught sight of us. I waved my cap. I've waved my cap. Everyone was astonished to see us. I am the navigator Valerian Ivanovich Albanov of the Brusilov expedition. We left the St. Anna 3 months ago. And then you reached out your arms, you pulled us on board. Since then, you fed me, you've kept me warm. You, the bravest sailors in the world. You took us to the mess and fed us fresh eggs and canned meat and tea with real sugar. And then, was I imagining this? A piano in the mess? And then you allowed us to wash in warm water and burn our old clothes. And then we drank brandy. And then you told me about the polar bears that live on board the ship. That they've grown so tame. And you told me that Conrad had found £1 in his mattress and had fallen asleep, clutching it to his chest. Then you told me that the ship has run out of fuel, that you are burning all that you can. And then you told me that the sea around us is starting to freeze.
We did not die aboard the St. Foka. We were rescued and taken home. Navigator Albanov was deemed unfit to serve during the war. His nerves were shattered. Over the coming years, he made repeated requests for ships to be sent to look for the St. Anna. In December 1919, he travelled to Omsk to discuss such a mission. As he returned from that trip, he was caught in a munitions explosion. His body was identified by his briefcase, which contained his diary and a hand-drawn copy of Nansen's inaccurate map.